Hey, this is Brandon Allen from the New Work Revolution Coaching and Training, and I want to talk today about a topic that comes up from time to time as I'm engaging leaders, particularly in a corporate setting. But I think if you're a business owner, this topic will also be appropriate for you as well. And it's a topic of managing up. And managing up is about basically building a relationship with people in power or people who are above you. And as a coach, I'm faced with the concept of managing up all the time because as a trusted advisor to a business owner, as a leader, these are people who in some ways look at me as, a hired person. So I'm not someone who's in a position of authority. Now, from an advice standpoint that I am, but from maybe some other levels, I'm not necessarily in the same vein from a power standpoint. And so managing up is something that I'm very familiar with. And this whole topic really calls back to my time in the corporate world. And one of the things that I never wanted to be in corporate America was a kiss ass. And unfortunately, my desire to not kiss ass became something that was to my own detriment. So instead of handling things in an emotionally intelligent way, and instead of building bridges with leaders who were above me, who actually had a lot of power and influence over my career and where it was going, I decided that I was going to be someone who spoke their mind, and I didn't take no for an answer, and I didn't accept someone's theory about why something was the way it was, and it created a lot of problems for me in my career. And in fact, when I started to get wise to the political savvy that's necessary with managing up, and I don't really even know that I love the term managing up, I look at this as just really building relationships with people who are in a position of power. As I started to kind of increase my political savvy, I started to realize that I created more influence. And you have this situation, and I can always harken back to a situation where we were in a meeting, and there was all these management level people in a meeting, and we had my boss's boss and my boss's boss's boss in this meeting, running this meeting, and they had this grand scheme for how they were going to do things. Now, if you're in a position, at a ground floor position, you realize how frustrating it is when someone who is so far removed from your position starts to tell you how to do your job best. It can be a little bit frustrating. And after listening to these leaders go through all these different strategies and techniques, I just couldn't take it anymore. I mean, the ideas were horrendous. They were horrendous. They weren't going to work. But instead of being savvy about this, when the vice president asked for feedback, my response was, that was the stupidest idea I'd ever heard. And that literally came out of my mouth, and I literally saw my career come to an absolute standstill at that very moment. All these people looked at me, my boss looked at me, and I realized I have screwed up. Honesty in this case was not the best policy. Now, was it a bad idea? It actually very much was a bad idea, and it didn't work. However, my approach was an even worse idea, and it kept me from moving forward. So as we're talking about managing up, I'm going to give you a couple things to think about as you're working with leaders who are in a position of power. The first thing is to look at, what does that leader want? So if I want to be someone who's influential, and being influential has nothing to do with a title, I want to be someone who figures out what is it that someone wants. So one of the things that I like to do with someone who's in a position of power, whether it's someone that I'm coaching with, a CEO, a high-level CEO, is I want to find out, what does this person want? What do they desire? What are their goals? What are their objectives? And how can I help that person look good and hit the goals that they're looking for? And a lot of times we spend too much time focusing on what we want, and then we treat our boss as someone who's just a tool to help us get what we want. Now, that may be true at some level, but I want to really build a savvy relationship to really connect with that person and figure out, what is it that that person wants. So as a second way of managing up, this is all about really giving your advice and giving input in uplifting ways. And this is especially prevalent for younger leaders. When you're a young leader, older leaders don't want to hear necessarily what you have to say. And as a young leader, you may be a very intelligent and smart person, but there's also something to be said for experience. And sometimes as a young leader, and I've been in this position years ago, not that I'm completely old, but as a younger leader, I've been in positions where I felt like I'm the smartest person in the room. All these people are idiots compared to me. And sometimes that attitude can be to our detriment, because in reality, as a young person, we think we know a lot of things, But what we realize is we don't know nearly as much as we think we do. So if you give advice and input, look for uplifting ways to give that advice or input. In fact, rather than give my direct input to a lot of people when they're in a position of authority, I typically will take the route of asking questions. Hey, what do you think about doing something like this? And what I'm trying to do as I'm talking about this is, it's kind of the classic Jedi mind trick. I want that leader to walk away from that situation with ideas and conclusions that I may have planted in their head, but I want them to think that it was their idea to begin with. I want them to feel like, hey, this is my idea and I'm steering the conversation. Sometimes as a leader, if we're trying to manage up, we can be someone who's too forceful in that conversation and we start ramming our agenda down a senior leader's throat. They're not going to be as receptive to that if we do that. So I like to come up with just, hey, what do you guys think about this? Or, I was wondering if maybe this would work. And what you'll see is they'll kind of think about those things, then they'll build on your idea, and then pretty soon you've received you've got what you came there to get, but now it wasn't your idea, it was their idea. And look, I don't care whose idea it was, and sometimes we have to let our ego to the side and not have to worry about taking credit for everything. I just want the agenda to get done. I don't care who takes credit for it, I just need it to get done. So I want to do that in a savvy way. So again, if you're looking at managing up, there's a couple of things here. Number one, what is the person in that position of power? What do they really want? Find out what really they're desiring, what they want, what they're looking to accomplish. And then the second thing is if you're going to give input or advice in this particular situation with a senior leader or a person who's in a position of power, look for uplifting ways to do that. Look for ways to create true influence rather than asserting your will and your dominance and letting your ego dominate the situation.